Hey everyone, ready to really get those brain cells firing? Today we're diving into a question that's kept philosophers up at night for ages.
Hmm.
Free will and moral responsibility.
Yeah, this is one of those topics that just grabs you and doesn't let go.
You got that right. And you've given us some really fascinating material to dig into today.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So, for those just joining the deep dive, the question at the heart of it all is, if our actions are already determined, whether it's by our genes, how we were raised, or even like our brain chemistry, can we really be held responsible for what we do?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It makes you question the very fabric of our justice system, our relationships, even how we see ourselves.
It really does. So let's start with this feeling of free will we all seem to experience.
Hmm.
Like every day we make what feel like deliberate choices like, do I want coffee or tea this morning? And we make a choice based on what we think we want in that moment. But what if? What if that decision, as simple as it seems, was already made for us? What if it all comes down to how our neurons are firing?
Right, and that's the heart of the debate. We feel this sense of agency like we are the authors of our actions, but then you have arguments like determinism, which propose that every single event, including our choices, is simply the result of prior causes, like a domino effect going back to the beginning of, well, everything. It makes you wonder, is there really any room for true choice in that scenario?
Okay, so if our choices are, let's say, pre-programmed like that, what happens to our justice system? Can we really punish someone for a crime if you could argue their brain made them do it?
That's a huge question, and it gets even more complex when you start factoring in things like brain chemistry and abnormal psychology. Imagine a scenario where someone commits a crime, and then we discover they have a brain tumor that's significantly impacting their behavior. Does that change how we view their responsibility?
I mean, it has to, right?
Right. And some argue that as we understand more about the brain and how it works, particularly in these more extreme cases, our focus should shift more towards rehabilitation, towards treatment, rather than simply punishment.
So are you saying free will is just an illusion then?
Well, not necessarily. It's not always so black and white. Some philosophers suggest that maybe we have degrees of freedom within a predetermined framework. One analogy I find helpful is to think of a river, flowing within its banks. Now, the river can't just decide to flow uphill, right? It's constrained,
Mhm.
but it can still flow with varying speeds. It can meander. It can even carve new paths over time. In a similar way, our choices might be influenced, maybe even significantly shaped by our biology, by our environment, but within those boundaries, there might still be some room for individual autonomy.
Okay, I like that analogy. That makes sense. So if we go with that idea, this river of limited freedom, how does that play out in our daily lives? How should we look at our choices or even our mistakes if they're not entirely free?
Well, that's where this discussion really becomes fascinating because if we can accept that maybe free will isn't about having absolute unconstrained choice, but rather a more nuanced understanding of the factors that influence behavior, it doesn't negate responsibility. But it does make us look deeper. It makes us ask, okay, what led this person to make this choice in the first place?
And having more information would hopefully lead to less judgment, right?
Exactly. This understanding can then foster a lot more compassion, both towards others and, importantly, towards ourselves as well.
So to kind of bring it all together, what you're saying is that even if our choices aren't completely free, maybe even if free will is largely an illusion, recognizing how our past experiences, even our biology, all these things that contribute to who we are, how they shape our actions, that could lead to a much more humane, more understanding approach to justice, to education, to, well, everything really.
Precisely. It invites us to approach difficult situations, complex situations, with a lot more empathy and a lot less judgment.
This deep dive has given us a lot to think about. If our choices aren't totally our own, if we're really just leaves in the wind, does that change how we judge, how we forgive? It's a question worth pondering.
It certainly is. It really makes you examine your own perceptions and challenge some deeply held assumptions.
It really does. Well, on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those big questions. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, and be sure to check out our show notes for further reading on this fascinating topic.
Until next time.